Hello everyone! Today I'm going to be talking to you about every book that I read in May. Now for each book I'm going to be telling you 4 things. 1, I'm going to give you a short spoiler-free synopsis of the book. 2, I'm going to give you some pros of reading that book. 3, some cons of reading that book. And finally, I'm going to give you my overall ranking out of 5 stars. What did I give that book? So the first book that I read in May is actually the second in a series, and it's Lasher by Anne Rice. So this is the second in the Mayfair Witch trilogy. The first one is called The Witching Hour. So if you like Anne Rice, you will definitely love these books. If you know nothing about them, it's basically a series about a family of witches that live in New Orleans, and every generation, they've been around for 13 generations, every generation they're kind of haunted by this familiar spirit named Lasher. And in the first book, which is epic by the way, it is so good. The first book kind of is more than just about Lasher. It's about their whole family and just a lot of other things. I don't want to spoil anything for you. But this book is specifically the follow-up to what happens to Lasher, the character specifically, what he even is, because before they just thought he was some sort of weird ghost, but now there's a little bit more to it. And there's some new characters introduced, and it's more set in the present, whereas the first book is set in the past and talks about each generation of witches for the 13 generations, dating all the way back to when they lived in Scotland in like the 1200s or 1600s or whatever it was. I can't remember. So this one follows the 2 main characters from the first book, but includes some new ones as well. So as far as the pros go, this book is really good. It's just like all Anne Rice books. The style is amazing. If you love Anne Rice's writing style, you will like this one too. Some people think she's a little too wordy or that her descriptions are a little too flowery, that kind of thing. But I really enjoy the style, so that's one of my favorite parts of this book. That would definitely be a pro for me. As for the cons, my problem with this book is that it kind of goes off the rails from book 1. Book 1 leads you to believe that certain things are going to happen. And then in this book, it introduces so many new things that it's almost kind of a turnoff a little bit for me. So I would still overall give this book 4 stars just because I love Anne Rice so much. And it's a really good follow-up to the first one, The Witching Hour. So the second book I read in May is, needless to say, the third one in that series called Taltos, also by Anne Rice. You can see how old these are. I mean, these things are literally falling out, and I got these used a long time ago. So yeah, they've seen better days. Basically, this one is the third in the trilogy. As far as the summary goes, it's mostly about this race called the Taltos. It turns out that there is sort of another race of people, not even really people, I don't know what they are. They are tall, they love milk, which is really weird, I know, and they grow to their full height as soon as they are born, and it doesn't take them very long either. When they're like incubating in the womb, they're born in like a couple months or something. So in this book, we learn more about what the Taltos are, but it kind of goes off the rails, like I said, the second one did from the first one. It varies a lot from the other 2. It's almost like you didn't really need this book. It could have just been a duology, as they say, with The Witching Hour and Lasher, but this book does kind of conclude the overall story of what happens to some of the other characters after the stuff with Lasher, but introduces some new characters too. So as far as the pros go, if you like Anne Rice's writing style, once again, you will still like this book. It is still set in New Orleans. If you didn't like all the history stuff from the other books, this one is more set in the present, so you might like that aspect to it. If you really like certain characters, it focuses on certain ones rather than others like the other books did, so maybe you would like the character focus a little bit better. But as far as the cons, there are actually quite a few cons to this book. The first one was so good that you just expect this one to be epic, but it's really not. It focuses on weird characters like a doll maker, and you're like, why do I care about this guy? Yeah, he's one of these Taltos creatures, which should be fascinating, but here we are talking about the faces of dolls and how beautiful they are. As far as my overall rating would go, I would only give this book about a 3 star, just because of how much I loved the other books in the series, and then that this one was a little bit of a letdown. So the next book I read in May is a young adult book, and it's called With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, I think, something like that. And I read this because I'm trying to read more contemporary YA fiction, like realistic fiction, not fantasy, not sci-fi, because that's usually what I read. I'm really trying to branch out. So this book is by the same author that wrote this book called The Poet X, which won a lot of awards, this National Book Award. And so I just thought that this would probably be pretty good too. I think it's on some award-winning lists for this year as well. Basically, this book is about a girl who is pregnant by the time that she is a freshman in high school. But this is set during her senior year, so her baby's already a couple years old. And she's dealing with the baby at home. She's dealing with trying to figure out, is she going to go to college? Is she going to just start work right away? And she doesn't really trust men anymore, boys, so she doesn't really have any sort of dating life until this guy shows up in her class one day and kind of, is trying to court her a little bit, and she's kind of leery about that now. So she has to balance all these different things. And one of the problems is she loves cooking, and that's why it's called With the Fire on High. And she signs up for a cooking class in school, and it's like her one reprieve, and it's this place where she can be creative, and she wants to go to Europe with the class. They're taking this big Europe trip, but she doesn't know if she'll have the money to go. She has to try to raise the money to go, things like that. And what's she going to do with her baby while she's gone? She lives with her grandmother as well. And she has this kind of estranged relationship with her father. So there's a lot of aspects going on in this book that make it interesting, but it was not for me. I didn't really like it. So as far as the prose go, it's really, really fast-paced. So what I mean is each chapter is usually only a couple pages. So, look at that. It's like chapter, next chapter. So if you like really fast-paced books, this is good for you. They're almost like little vignettes too, because they don't always pick up right where the previous chapter left off. So if you're reading a chapter about her at school, the very next chapter might be what's going on at home. The very next chapter might be about her at work. So it is very, very fast-paced. As far as the cons go, there are a lot. I could go on forever. The characters weren't interesting. I didn't care about any of them. I could have stopped reading halfway through, and that would have been totally fine with me. The style was fine. It just didn't really stand out at all. The plot didn't have anything interesting happen. I guess that's what realistic fiction is. It's stuff that could have happened to just anybody at any point, but I just didn't like any of it. Maybe it just didn't relate to me. I don't know. But most of this book was not really up my alley. So as far as my overall rating goes, I would probably give this book 2 stars. I could see where I would recommend it to people that like this kind of book if they are looking for realistic fiction that is just about your daily average problems, that doesn't have fantasy in it. But to me, I think even if I was looking for a realistic fiction, I wouldn't pick this book. So the final 2 books that I read in May are in a series, and the first one is called Hold Me Closer, Necromancer by Lish McBride. And I picked this book because of the title. I think you can tell that it sounds really funny. Hold Me Closer, Necromancer. I don't even know if kids these days will get that. They probably have no idea what that's even from. But that's why I picked it, just because of the title. And on the front, it said it was a scary, funny book or a funny, scary book. And in our library, we have it listed in horror, but I don't really think it's that scary. So as far as the synopsis goes, it is about a boy who learns that he is a necromancer, and he can bring people back from the dead, of course. There are things like talking heads. I really didn't expect that. The book was just really normal, and nothing exciting was happening in the first chapter or so. And then all of a sudden, there's a decapitated talking head. And I'm like, what? And it's one of his friends. So there's some interesting things in this book for sure that you don't expect. And as you go along, you realize that there is another necromancer who is, of course, the bad guy, and he wants to be the only one around, or else he wants to train the main character. And so he kind of gives him an ultimatum. Hey, I'm going to kill you, or else you need to let me train you as like my little protege, and we can work on this together. So he doesn't want to join the bad guy, obviously. So he's got to figure out a way to fight back. There's also werewolves in this. I did not expect that. It did not tell me that in the beginning. Oh, wait, yeah, I did. I lied. There's a werewolf girl that he meets while he's in a cage, locked up. It's a whole thing. So there's a lot of interesting things, and the potential that it had at the end for the sequel was amazing. So I loved this book. I'm going to go ahead and say it. The prose are numerous. It is so funny. Talk about fast-paced. This is really fast-paced. One thing happens, and then all of a sudden, he's getting kidnapped by somebody, and then all of a sudden this is happening. And then it does go back and forth between different characters' points of view. So that helps it move along more quickly as well. Each time it switches, something is going on in the plot. So it keeps it going. Like I said, the style, the humor, it was great. The plot was great. It was so unique and weird, and it was just fascinating. As far as the cons go, there aren't very many. I would say the only con that I could really think of off the top of my head is that sometimes when it does switch to the other character's point of view, you don't know if you're like, well, wait, but why did it really need to do that? I think it could have achieved the same things without doing that. Like you get chapters from some random characters, like even some of his friends that just kind of come out of the blue, or, you get a new character point of view towards the very end, like over here, that you never had the whole rest of the book. So that's the only thing that kind of throws it off for me. But other than that, I thought it was great. So as far as the overall rating, I would give this 4 stars, and I would highly recommend it to anyone that wants to read something funny. And doesn't mind about decapitated talking heads. And so the final book that I finished in May is actually the sequel to Hold Me Closer, Necromancer. And get this, look at the title. It's called Necromancing the Stone. So most young people still probably don't know what this is. You might not even know what this is, but I love the movie Romancing the Stone. If you've never seen that, you should totally go watch that. So Necromancing the Stone starts off pretty much exactly where the other book left off. And the other one leaves off where the main character, he's a necromancer. He has inherited all of the stuff from the bad guy, including his house that he lived in, this huge big manor. And it's like kind of haunted and creepy and scary. Now he's got to live in this place. There's a torture chamber in the basement. There are like lawn gnomes that come alive. And there's this creature that is one of my favorite characters that was a part dragon, part cat, part human. Like he could turn into all 3 of those things. And he's kind of like the servant of the house. And he gets passed down to the main character as well. So he's a huge character in this book. And I love him very, very much. Also because I like dragons and cats. And he has the personality of a cat. So like who wouldn't love that? But anyway, this book is set right after the previous one, as I mentioned, but the problem is it has the same bad guy. You're like, well, wait, shouldn't she have come up with something new? Like I wanted more to happen than that. So basically it's a very similar plot to the first one, but there's just a little bit more that goes on. As far as the prose go, it's still funny. I wouldn't say it's as funny as the first one. It's still fast-paced. The pacing is really weird, which I'll talk about in a minute. So mostly it's the same prose as the first one. It just wasn't quite as good as the first one. As far as the cons go, there are quite a few. This time I would say it just didn't live up to the potential that it could have had. I mean, you've got this kid that's going to inherit all this stuff from this powerful necromancer, and that could have gone in so many different places. And instead it was just like, oh, well, let's fight the same bad guy again. But let's break up the text, the main plot, the main conflict. Let's include just some other random things along the way that kind of draws your attention away from the main conflict. It's real weird. So that is one of the main problems with it, is the conflict is not even like the main conflict. I guess it's supposed to be, but then like at one point towards the end, he all of a sudden is helping this council that he's on, because he's on this council of all these like different supernatural creatures. And he goes out in the woods and helps them to find Bigfoot and like do something with Bigfoot. And I don't really know why that's there. It doesn't have to do anything with the plot. And it happens so close to the end that just when the plot could have been really, really ramping up, then it's just like, oh, now we're going to go do this other thing that doesn't relate to anything. And it's like, okay, well, all right. So I think it just had a lot of potential that it did not capture. It's also not quite as funny as the first one. It doesn't have as many extra point of view chapters, which, could be good or bad either way. You didn't really need them in the first one, but at least it kind of broke up the text and made it a little more interesting. So overall, I would probably give this book 3 stars and say that it's just not quite as good as the first one, even though I noticed on Goodreads that it has a higher rating than the first book, and I don't know why, because it's definitely not as good. But let me know what you think if you read these 2. And right now, these are the only 2 in the series. I don't know that she'll ever write a third one, but I'm thinking that the reason why this one wasn't as good is because she was asked to write a second one when it was never originally planned. She was like probably thinking, hey, I've got this great idea for a first novel. She writes it, and then the publisher says, you got to write a sequel. So she may not write another one. Who knows? So those are all the books that I actually finished in May. I've actually started 2 other ones, but I'll be talking about those in my June wrap-up video. Just to show you what they are, though, I did start an audiobook, which is The Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin, and I'm actually pretty decently far into it. I've been listening to the audiobook. I have read these books before, and I love them, of course, and I've watched the show, although seasons really 5 through 8 are just a travesty, and my husband would not even probably let me rewatch them if I wanted to. I'm just kidding, he would, but who would want to do that? That's like torturing yourself. But with Clash of Kings, it's been really fun to listen to it as an audiobook because I've already read it once, so if I'm doing something, I can kind of pay attention while I'm, multitasking basically. And we'll see when I finish this one if I like it as well on the reread. And finally, I did start just only like 40 pages of A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. And I know I've already talked about this in my June TBR video, so I won't say much, but I basically thought that this series started off so strong. The first 2 books were awesome. Book 3, not good. This is like a little novella that follows at the end of book 3 that's supposed to connect to a new trilogy here pretty soon. And I don't think it could be worse than book 3, so I'm hoping for the best. You can see it's really tiny. But I just wanted to let you know that I'd started it, and I'll let you know a lot more about this one later. So those are all the books that I read in May. Thank you so much for watching, and check back at the end of June to see my June wrap-up video, and we'll see how many I get to then. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.